Court's decision.
The full bench delivered a crushing blow to the ARL. It was game on for Super League.
Ken Arthurson and John Quayle were simply stunned. Super League staff overjoyed.
It was sheer pressure on so many occasions, especially during our appearances in court. It was a terribly tough time.
See how great your game can be. Super League.
1997 was the year of the Great Divide. The ARL and Super League went head-to-head.
No one was prepared to give up. The best interest of the corporation came first. The game wasn't considered in any way.
Super League will breathe new life into football.
You've forgotten the pride in our history. It's a shame that you don't understand, Mr. Murdoch. But there's no way you're buying our game.
Clubs had to choose between two competitions.
It had gone too far. And we couldn't just make a phone call and said, let's get together here, because both parties were too far apart.
In what became known as the Super League War, it was the blue-collar town of Newcastle that would become the battleground.
Newcastle was the front line of the Super League War, where it was the only place they had rival teams competing in rival competitions.
I think News Limited believe, and also the ARL believed, that whoever got Newcastle were going to go a long, long way to winning the war.
If Newcastle had gone to Super League would have won right there and then. It would have been the last throw of the dice.
I've never come across a town that's more passionate about the rugby league than Newcastle.
Newcastle was rugby league gold. The city's team, the Knights. Its players squarely in the sights of News Limited's Super League.
I spoke to News Limited first, and I went straight across to Phillip Street and spoke to the ARL. By the end of that day, I knew where I wanted to go to.
Paul was signed first because we felt that Paul was the leader. Paul was very much a part of what Newcastle was about.
The News Limited boys were absolutely pounding down the door, I mean continuously pounding down the door. I was really determined to make sure that our club got to hear both sides. So we decided to hire a bus from a bloke up the road, threw the boys in, and we drove down the road.
Paul Harrigan became known in the corridors of power at News Limited only as the bus driver. They despised him from that day on.
Now Andrew John. Tries to little hole himself. He's close, he reaches out. That's a try to Andrew John.
Talk to one side and, we decided, right, we're going to stay with this side. Then you talk to the other side and that'd sound, so enticing, and getting phone calls at 3 in the morning and stuff.
I'll tell you what made the difference. When Gus Gould finally came down and sat in this very room that I'm speaking from right now and addressed the players, it was a Churchillian speech. And it swung those boys there and then.
That night, most of the boys signed with the ARL.
Without the Johns brothers, without Paul Harrigan, News Limited didn't have the Knights. It blew them out of the war.
Super League had lost the battle for the Knights. It was determined not to lose the war.
News Limited thought, well, we haven't got the Knights, we'll set up our own team with what became known as the Hunter Mariners.
I couldn't believe it. My first impression was, mate, this town's not big enough. And then I got told that basically News Limited just want to squash you blokes into the ground. And that's why the team's here, and that's what they're going to do. And I've got to say, that sent a bit of a shiver up my back.
He's got it down under the black dot.
The reason I signed with the Super League franchise in Newcastle was obviously to play football in Newcastle. Guaranteed to be a licence in town, and didn't want to pack up and move. So it was the start of my career.
The people in Newcastle, what it did is it fired them up. And it made a cocktail that was explosive at times.
Furious at Murdoch's Mariner invasion, a group called Aussies for the ARL emerged, led by the formidable Barbara Davis.
I think the Super League thing just hit so hard because of the loyalty of the people here. They couldn't believe that all of a sudden someone was going to own the game.
The Aussies for ARL was a big thing in the community, and it got a lot of people mentally, or did think that the Knights and the ARL was the only way to go, and they just closed their eyes down to the whole concept of the Super League.
The Hunter Mariners were despised, probably the most unpopular team in the history of rugby league.
Sesty getting close, he's in!
It was a little bit like a civil war, I suppose, in one sense, where it was a whole town of working class town uprising against a huge organisation.
The whole thing became so nasty. You had some of the Mariners executives that had to get around with bodyguards to get around town because of death threats.
You know, blokes had to walk around with bodyguards that were involved with different teams. It was threats. It was the whole box and dice. It was a town ripped apart.
A lot of our kids suffered a lot, you know, being spat on in the street, for instance.
I did have a death threat against my 13-year-old daughter.
Our offices got vandalised, so it was obviously everyone showing their allegiance to the Knights and certainly very anti-Hunter Mariners.
It was real nasty there for a while for not necessarily the players, but for the officials who went to the Super League side. And a lot of things were said and done, and you know, I might have been a part of that, which I regret now.
The Mariners take the field.
Despite their pariah status, the Mariners found success on the playing field.
The battle begins for the World Club Challenge.
The Hunter Mariners played in the World Club Challenge final.
I think we hugely overachieved, yeah. We were misfits thrown together from everywhere. We were against the whole community that didn't want us, and we played really well.
Come on, he close.
They could have won the World Club Challenge and no one in Newcastle would have given us stuff.
While the Mariners' World Club Challenge heroics went almost unnoticed, on the other side of town, the Knights made it all the way to the ARL Grand Final and won.
I don't think he could have written a script better than the 97 Grand Final.
What made the Grand Final so special for everyone in Newcastle and the Hunter was it had been such a tumultuous, tough year with the Super League war, and out of all that, to win the Grand Final and for the war to be over, it was a great time.
It was a moment that convinced the powers that be on both sides of the fence during the Super League war that the game had to come back together. It's still seen as the game that saved the game.
While Newcastle partied, the writing was on the wall for both sides of the Super League divide.
The issue that made both parties stand up and say, hey, look, we've got to play the game and we've just got to stop the fighting.
Having a united game again had to come as soon as possible.
ARL and Super League, arch enemies for so long, will next year work as one.
The fans demanded, and above all the game demanded, that there be one competition.
The term of Super League is now dead and buried.
Trevor Gilmeister leads the South Queensland Crushers.
Super League peace was now a reality, but it came at a price.
Peterson again, he puts on a little skip and away he goes.
First to go were the South Queensland Crushers, the Western Reds and the badly bruised Mariners.
Dykes giving chase, he won't get there.
There were surplus teams on both sides, and when it came down to which team was going to survive into the National Rugby League of 1998 onwards, in Newcastle there was no question it was going to be the Knights.